Ladies and gentlemen, this is TVP World. I'm your host Benjamin Lee, and welcome aboard the Eastern Express. Russia's footprint in Africa used to be defined by deniable mercenaries whispering in the shadows. Now, Moscow is trying something bolder, turning Sudan into a strategic partner, a logistics hub, and a proving ground for its global ambitions. From goldfields to grain silos, from Red Sea ports to satellite networks, Russia is selling itself as the partner that respects sovereignty while the West wields sanctions. Russia insists Wagner Group has been domesticated. Sudan calls Moscow a friend in every sense, and both praise the coming naval base in the Red Sea, even as its construction sits on ice. US sanctions tighten, China hovers with its own agenda, and Russia is stretching its influence thousands of kilometers away. It's a contest of survival, resources, and global reach. So, without further ado, let's take a look at our latest report to find out more.
Sudan's civil war is rewriting the balance of power on the Red Sea. Khartoum's generals are edging closer to Washington and further from Moscow. For the Kremlin, its long-planned naval foothold in Port Sudan is quietly slipping away. Port Sudan lies on Sudan's northeastern shore, facing Saudi Arabia across the Red Sea, on the main route between the Suez Canal and the Indian Ocean. It is the country's main commercial port and a key stop on one of the world's busiest sea lanes. In 2020, Russia reached a preliminary deal to build a naval logistics hub there, space for up to 4 warships and 300 personnel, but the agreement was never ratified. The war that erupted in 2023 froze the project in place. Moscow's ambassador now admits that plans for the base are, quote, suspended, with analysts saying General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan himself ordered the post to strengthen his hand with the United States. His camp has floated ideas of US access to the Red Sea coast and closer intelligence ties with Israel. Meanwhile, Sudan is being torn apart. Since April 2023, the army and the rapid support forces, heirs to the Janjaweed militias, have fought a war that has uprooted millions. Port Sudan has become both a lifeline and a choke point for civilians in aid. For ordinary Sudanese, the Red Sea reflects not opportunity but competing ambitions. And in a region where every shoreline is a strategic prize, Sudan's fractured coast has become the newest arena where global power plays meet a nation's fight to survive.
And now, let's zone in on the east-planning portion of our show. It sounds like a subplot from a geopolitical thriller. Ukrainian operatives appearing in Sudan, thousands of kilometers from home. But this small covert mission shows how Kyiv is now hitting Russia far beyond the battlefield. Here is how the story unfolds.
Reports in Western media revealed that Ukrainian Special Operation Forces has operated in Sudan, supporting the government of General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan against the rapid support forces led by Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo. These clashes center on control of Sudan's gold-rich territories, long penetrated by Russian-linked networks. For Kyiv, Sudan is not simply another battleground. Wagner-associated structures have entrenched themselves in the country's gold sector, moving billions through murky channels that help Moscow dodge sanctions. Disrupting those flows offers Ukraine a way to pressure Russia far beyond Europe. Ukrainian personnel reportedly assisted Burhan's office with reconnaissance and limited operations around Khartoum, concentrating on nighttime movement and disrupting route ties to Russian-backed groups. The mission wrapped up quietly in early 2024, with all troops returning home. Sudan's leadership later thanked Kyiv, and President Volodymyr Zelensky briefly met Burhan during a refueling stop in Ireland to discuss shared security threats. The Sudan operation may not shift the war's trajectory, but it signals Ukraine's broader strategy, confronting Russian intelligence wherever it takes root, even in the goldfields of East Africa.
And now, let's take a look at the issue in greater detail. When Russia looks at Sudan today, it sees something far bigger than a war-torn nation struggling to hold itself together. It sees 216 million acres of land, the Red Sea's narrow maritime checkpoints, Africa's second largest gold reserves, and a government eager for a partner that won't lecture it about sovereignty. Sudan, for its part, sees Russia too. A Security Council veto, deep military industrial capacity, and a geopolitical heavyweight seeking new allies as it faces confrontation with the West. In the ashes of conflict, Moscow and Khartoum have been trying to build something strategic. This new chapter is not emerging in secret, it's happening in plain sight. Sudan's ambassador in Moscow, Mohammed Siraj, says his country wants a full strategic partnership with Russia, not symbolism, but substance. Moscow agrees. Sudan and Russia, both under pressure from rival coalitions, see each other as geopolitical lifelines. According to a Wall Street Journal report, Sudan has offered Russia a 25-year lease for a naval base in Port Sudan, along with preferential access to the country's lucrative gold deposits. In return, Khartoum expects deliveries of air defense systems and other weapons needed to counter the Rapid Support Forces insurgency. The proposal envisions stationing up to 300 Russian personnel and hosting as many as 4 Russian Navy vessels at a time. A Russian base on the Red Sea would give Moscow a prime vantage point to monitor traffic through the Suez Canal, a corridor handling roughly 12% of global trade, and would mark Russia's first naval foothold in Africa. Sudan's offer also highlights the shifting dynamics of the country's civil war. Russia initially supported the RSF, while Ukraine assisted government forces in defending Khartoum. Khartoum's outreach to Moscow underscores a desperate recalibration. But this alliance carries another shadow, the Wagner Group. For years, the group's mercenaries appeared wherever Russian influences expand. Gold mines, conflict zones, coups, Wagner was more than a military force, but more of a geopolitical instrument. Today, Russia insists that era is over. The group has been fully brought under state control, now acting as Africa Corp, a component of the Russian Ministry of Defense. Sudan's officials welcome that shift. They want Russian support, not Russian PMC freelancing. The question now is whether this partnership becomes a defining axis in the region or another unrealized geopolitical experiment. Now, whether this becomes a sovereign pivot or a dangerous entanglement will depend on how both sides navigate the next phase. But one thing is clear, the era of Wagner Group's shadow is ending, and a new, state-driven chapter of Russian influence in Africa is beginning. And now, here to shed more light on the issue is Thomas von Linge, a freelance Worcester journalist. Hello, sir, and welcome to Eastern Express.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Now, we are trying to explore Russia's involvement in Sudan today, but before we get into that, can you help us break down what's the current situation of the conflict over there?
Yeah, so the war in Sudan is primarily fought between 2 different sides. You have the regular Sudanese army, generally known as the SAF, Sudanese Armed Forces, and then the paramilitary group, the Rapid Support Forces, which was actually founded by the previous regime in Sudan, but revolted against the military authorities in the country 2.5 years ago. And at the moment, the country is currently in sort of standstill, where the east of the country, including the Red Sea shoreline, is controlled by the regular armed forces, the SAF, while the west of the country, including the many gold deposits and the vast borders with other Sahelian states like Chad and with Libya, is controlled by the Rapid Support Forces. And right down to the center of the country is now where the most battles are taking place.
And with all this going on, my question would be, what do you think Russia's strategic objective over there is?
Well, Russia has been very opportunistic in this war, I would say, and trying to explore possibilities with both sides. In the beginning of the conflict, Russia, and in particular the Wagner units, seem to have been backing the Rapid Support Forces, due to historic ties between the RSF and Wagner, also other Russian involvement in the region. Think about the neighboring Central African Republic, Mali and Burkina Faso further away. So in the beginning, Wagner was really on the side of the RSF, supplying weapons, ammunition, also giving tactical support. But as the war in Sudan progressed, and of course, as in Russia and in Ukraine, the Wagner mutiny took place and Prigozhin died, the relevance of Wagner decreased a bit, and the Russian states, the Kremlin, tried to explore other opportunities. So one thing that keeps coming back whenever we're talking about Russia and Sudan is the naval base that the Russians want on Sudan's Red Sea shore. And it has been talked about for years and years and years. And it's nothing as of yet has really happened. But just the other day, there were reports again that the Sudanese armed forces were considering buying new Russian Sukhoi jets, and in return, the Russians could finally start their building their naval base on the Sudanese shore. But still, it's still very much hypothetical, and Russia has not fully committed to any of the sides in the war at the moment.
Right, so it does sound like instead of outright supporting one side of the conflict, they're trying to hedge their bets on both sides of this civil war and trying to gain the utmost benefits for itself out of it. And recently, we've also heard reports of some Ukrainian units reportedly targeting Wagner or now African Corps personnel and assets in Sudan as well. How does that factor into the conflict?
Well, I would say in the same sense that how the Wagner mutiny and the death of Prigozhin sort of decreased the relevance of Wagner in Sudan. It also decreased Wagner as a priority for Ukrainian special forces to target overseas. And as you said, in the beginning of the conflict, I would say like in the first year, there was some Ukrainian military involvement in Sudan. It's basically started when Zelensky and the head of the Sudanese military, Al-Burhan, met at the United Nations General Assembly, and afterwards some videos and reports appeared of Ukrainian special forces operating in the Sudanese capital and targeting RSF militants and alleged Wagner operatives there. But as Wagner's own role in Sudan decreased, Ukraine's role naturally decreased as well, because Ukraine does not really have a direct interest in the Sudanese civil war, aside from trying to counter Russian influence.
All right. Of course, we've also heard, like you mentioned, how Wagner has transformed since Prigozhin's death, and it's going to, it has become what is known as the African Corps. Do you see that evolution having substantial change when it comes to the actual conflict in Sudan itself?
Well, the involvement of Wagner, or now the African Corps, has definitely decreased since the beginning of the war in 2023. But we have seen some more aggressive operations from the African Corps into Sudan from neighboring Central African Republic. The interesting thing is that these were alleged attacks by African Corps soldiers against RSF positions, so the very same RSF which they used to support 2 years prior in the conflict. So it really demonstrates how Russia has different interests in the conflict and can just easily switch from one side to the other if it considers that to be the more beneficial move.
Right. How do people within Sudan look at these organizations? We do see Russians trying to kind of whitewash the image of their presence there in Sudan with various propaganda efforts, but has it been fruitful, to say the least?
I would say that people in Sudan are really not thinking about Russia and its involvement there. Like in the beginning of the conflict, it was an issue that was discussed. People in Sudan were very much afraid that their own country would become sort of a proxy battlefield between Russia and Ukraine. Mm-hmm. But as the war progressed and the role of both countries decreased, while the violence, the mass killings, and the humanitarian catastrophe in Sudan only worsened, sort of those two countries went further to the background. So, when talking about Sudan, Russia's role at the moment is much smaller than it is compared to other countries in the region like Mali or Burkina Faso or Central African Republic. So I would not say like people have any strong positive opinions about the Russians, but considering that they do not really play a very prominent role in the current fighting, they do not really have any strong negative opinions about them either.
Right. Are there any indicators that we can keep an eye out for to gauge whether or not Russians' involvement in Sudan is going to increase, decrease, or any signs that can reflect kind of the broader involvement of Moscow within Sudan?
Well, the Russians will always try to exploit new possibilities in Sudan, especially in the civil war. I think now, and when we're in a situation where both the SAF and the RSF are pretty equally matched, the Russians will still sort of wait and see which sides the conflict will go. At the moment, they will feel that either the SAF has the upper hand or the RSF has the upper hand. They will try to, court that particular side in order to get the best deal out of it. But the Russians still very much want their Red Sea naval base. They very much want to have access to the gold mines in the west of Sudan. So it seems very likely that they will keep playing a role in the country and that they will keep seeking new ways, new opportunities to only increase their foothold in this very strategic country.
Right. But Russia, of course, is not the only player that has vested interest in Sudan as well. How does that fare with other players in the region, such as UAE, Egypt, Iran, and Turkey?
Well, I'd say the UAE now definitely dominates the entire field in Sudan. Because as many Sudanese would agree, without the UAE, the war would not be going on at the moment. The UAE's financial support, military support, its intel support to the RSF has been vital in the war effort of that paramilitary organization. And the UAE benefits from that greatly with access to Sudan's gold mines, the other resources in the country. So the UAE is really now the most dominant player in the country entirely. On the other side, on the SAF side, other countries like Egypt, like Turkey, have been sort of trying to equal that by increasing their support to the SAF. But it has been much more covert and still to a much smaller scale because the SAF's allies are not ready to commit as much to the conflict as the UAE has done on the side of the RSF.
Do you see even major players like United States or China also having a vested interest in being able to wrangle some control over this area?
I think first, when it comes to the Chinese, they consider that they can work with everybody. So the Chinese have also a lot of economic interest in Sudan. But from a Chinese calculus, they do not really need to commit to either of the two sides in order to get what they want in Sudan. Whatever way the conflict will go, the Chinese will probably figure that they can do business with whether it's the SAF or the RSF or any post-peace civilian government that could take place. On the side of the United States, Trump has very much his commitment of being the president that makes peace everywhere. And Sudan seemed to have been one of the latest countries added to that list, especially regional allies like Saudi Arabia, like Egypt, have been pressing the United States to finally get a ceasefire in the country. But on the other hand, the United Arab Emirates, which also has some sway over the Trump administration, is also trying to tilt the Trump more into their side of the conflict. By, for example, convincing the administration to sanction the Sudanese armed forces over alleged chemical weapons attacks. So it seems unlikely that either the Chinese or the United States will commit themselves militarily in the conflicts. But it is possible that both will seek an increasing role in mediating or in the future way in which the country will go.
Right. Thank you so much for your input and insight. Really appreciate it. And thanks for being with us on Eastern Express.
Thank you.
And now we're moving on to the Eastern News Flash, a series of all the other stories from the East that you don't want to miss. Russian forces expanded their control along several sections of the front in November, while Ukraine faced one of the deadliest 24-hour waves of missile and drone attacks in weeks.
The mapping project Deep State says Russian troops seized around 505 square kilometers last month, nearly double the October figure, with the heaviest pressure south of Huliaipole and around Pokrovsk and Mirnograd. The group also logged almost 6,000 Russian assault operations, the highest pace this year. In Dnipro, a Russian ballistic missile hit an industrial area, killing 4 and wounding 40. while nationwide strikes between November 30th and December 1st left at least 6 people dead. Ukraine also reported blasts hitting rail infrastructure in Russia's Novosibirsk and Bryansk regions, though Kyiv did not claim responsibility.
Ukraine has entered the global top tier of weapons producers for the first time, according to new data from the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute.
The state-owned Ukrainian defense industry company, or UOP, is now ranked 52nd among the world's 100 largest arms manufacturers after boosting its revenue by 41% in 2024, the fourth fastest rate in Europe. CPRI says global defense revenue reached a record $679 billion last year, driven largely by the war in Ukraine, while UOP continued operating under wartime shortages and sanctions. The company partners with nearly all major US and European manufacturers and now produces artillery, armored vehicles, ammunition and missiles at increasing scale.
Kyrgyzstan's snap parliamentary election has delivered a sweeping win for a candidate loyal to President Sadir Japarov, tightening his grip on the country's political system.
Turnout reached only 37% after a muted campaign with little open dissent, but pro-government figures secured a commanding majority in the 90-seat parliament. Independent voices shrank further, though a handful of critical lawmakers retained their seats in Bishkek. Observers from the OSCE noted heavily restricted campaigning, pressure on media and limited public debate. A gender-balancing rule ensured at least 30 women were elected, raising female representation despite broad concerns over shrinking political space.
And that's all on this episode of Eastern Express. For more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.